Go into a luxury watch boutique and you'll get a very good show. Watches at 10,000, 15, 25, and the vocabulary to match. Heritage, artistry, craft. A lot of it is honest. Some of those watches really are extraordinary pieces of machinery. What nobody in the room mentions is how far down the price ladder those design ideas actually go. Applied indices, sunburst finishing, sapphire crystal, a movement that winds itself off the swing of your arm. You can buy every one of those things for $200, $300, $475. Not a rough imitation of them. The same finishing methods and the same mechanical layout. That shimmer you see when light crosses the dial of a $10,000 Rolex is a specific manufacturing operation, and it shows up on watches sitting in a display case most people walk straight past. The watch market is worth north of $71 billion this year, and the houses at the top are posting record profits. A 2024 buyer survey found that 42% of first-time luxury buyers aged 25 to 40 made that purchase after watching watch content online. Nobody handed them a Rolex at graduation. They went looking, and what they found was that quality doesn't start at $5,000. So, 10 watches between $100 and $500. I'm going to walk through the actual finishing techniques, the actual movement specs, the actual material science, so that you can pick up any watch at any price and read what you're holding. Watch number 1, the Casio Duro MDV 106, around $55. Stay with me on this one, because it tells you something useful about what you're paying for in a dive watch. 200 meters of water resistance, a screw-down crown, a unidirectional bezel that only turns counterclockwise. Those are 3 core requirements of ISO 6425, the international standard for professional dive watches. And it's the same standard Omega builds the Seamaster Professional to. The Duro hits all 3 for $55. The lume dies faster than it would on a nicer diver. The mineral crystal picks up scratches. The bracelet is about what you'd expect. But the water resistance is real, the crown is real, the bezel is real, and this watch will do the functional job of a dive watch for years. Bill Gates wears a Casio, not because an AP is out of reach for him. There's something clarifying about a guy who could buy anything, choosing the thing that just works. Watch number 2, the Vostok Amphibia, around $100 to $150. This one starts in 1967, in the middle of the Cold War. The Soviet Ministry of Defense wanted a dive watch good to 200 meters. The Swiss had already solved that problem, but their solutions sat behind patents, and Soviet factories of the era couldn't hold Swiss tolerances anyway. So the job went to Mikhail Novikov and Vera Belova, chief designers at the Chistopol watch factory, which had been supplying the Ministry of Defense since the Second World War. What they came up with was a case that uses water pressure to seal itself. The crystal flexes slightly and compresses inward as pressure rises. The caseback sits on a rubber gasket that gets squeezed harder the deeper you go. The more the water pushes, the tighter the watch closes. That became the Amphibia. It launched in 1967, and it's still made at the same factory with the same case design for $100 to $150. Inside is the caliber 2451B, an automatic Vostok designs and builds itself rather than buying in from a supplier. The dials swing wildly across the lineup. Some are lovely in a retro military way. Others are strange, with color combinations that look like they wandered off a Soviet propaganda poster, and that inconsistency is a lot of the charm. The finishing isn't refined by Japanese or Swiss standards. The acrylic crystal scratches, though it polishes back with a bit of polywatch and a thumb. The bezel has no clicks, just smooth, bidirectional friction. No marketing department wrote that origin story. It solved a hard problem in 1967, and it's still solving it for $100. Watch number 3, the Orient Bambino, around $150 to $200. Every time this watch shows up in a photo, somebody asks how much it cost. Start with the crystal, because it isn't flat. It domes upward, and what that does to light is the reason dress watch designers used domed crystals in the 1950s and still use them now. Light hitting a flat crystal bounces straight back at you. Light hitting a dome scatters around the curve, warm a little, distorted at the edges, and gives the dial a depth that flat sapphire can't reproduce. It's why photographs of vintage Jaeger-LeCoultre dress watches have that particular glow. The dome is doing that. Those vintage JLCs from the same 1950s and 60s era, the Bambino borrows from, go for $2,000 to $4,000 today in decent condition. The Bambino gets you the visual language for $150. Applied indices, sunburst dial, an in-house automatic with hand winding and hacking, lugs that curve down and follow your wrist, a case under 12 millimeters. Blue hands on cream, which never went out of style because it was never in style. It was just correct. The mineral crystal will scratch. The bracelet in the box is bad, so swap it for leather on day one. Those are the honest caveats. The face itself is one of the most beautiful things you can buy for $150 in any category, watches or otherwise. Watch number 4. The Orient Kamasu, $200 to $300. Here's where comparing these to expensive divers stops being an argument and turns into a spec sheet. Look at the dial. That's a sunburst finish, brushed radially out from the center so the surface shifts and moves as light travels across it. It's the same finishing technique Rolex uses on the Submariner dial at $10,000. Orient does it on the Kamasu at $200. Not a lookalike process. The same operation. The hour markers aren't printed, and they aren't decals. They're machined three-dimensional metal pieces, attached to the dial individually, each with its own loom plot. That's what applied indices means, and it's the difference between a dial that looks flat under a loop and one that has actual topography. The Tag Heuer Aquaracer at $2,500 has applied indices. So does this. Sapphire sits at 9 on the Mohs scale. A knife blade is 6.5. Quartz sand, the stuff that ruins most crystals, is 7. Sapphire shrugs off basically anything you'll encounter in normal life, and finding it at this price is still a little surprising. The Kamasu has it, plus 200 meters, a screw-down crown, the F6922 automatic with hacking and hand winding, a 120-click bezel with clean printing, and solid end links on the bracelet. The caveat is accuracy. Plus 25 to minus 15 seconds a day is a wide window. Everything else about it punches far above $200. Watch number 5. The Citizen Promister EcoDrive Diver, $200 to $250. This is where the case for solar quartz over mechanical gets hard to argue with. 6 months of power reserve. Not hours, not days. EcoDrive turns any light into charge. Sunlight, a desk lamp, office fluorescence. All of it feeds the cell. Put this in a dark drawer in January and pull it out in July, and it's still keeping time. You have never changed the battery, and you never will. And there's no automatic on Earth that matches that. ISO 6425 certified. 200 meters. Unidirectional bezel. A guarded, precisely threaded screw-down crown. Thick, high-contrast loom that charges fast and burns all night. Solid end links. The Omega Seamaster carries the same ISO 6425 certification and costs just over $4,000. The mineral crystal scratches. There's no hacking and no hand winding, because this is a quartz tool watch, and it doesn't pretend otherwise. If the mechanical experience is what you want, this isn't your watch. If you want a professional-grade diver that asks nothing of you and runs for decades without maintenance, I don't know what else you'd buy. Watch number 6. The Seiko 5 Sports, specifically the SRPG Field Series, $230 to $280. This answers a question most buyers don't think to ask. What if I only want one watch? Arabic numerals, bold, high contrast, legible at a glance. That isn't a cost-saving shortcut. It's a choice military watch designers made deliberately, because you read a field watch in bad light while you're doing something else. The 4R36 automatic, 24 joules, roughly 41 hours of reserve, hacking, hand winding, day and date, 100 meters of water resistance, nothing missing from the sheet. Then there's serviceability, which nobody talks about loudly enough. NH and 4R series, Seiko movements, get serviced by watchmakers on every continent. Parts are everywhere. A full service runs $100 to $175. You can own this for 30 or 40 years without ever worrying that a repair will be impossible or a part will have vanished. Hardlex scratches more easily than Sapphire. The included NATO is fine, but basic. That's the trade at $230 for one watch that works with jeans, a blazer, a trailhead, and a job. Interview, I can't think of a better answer at this money. Watch number 7. The Seiko Presage Cocktail Time, about $475 retail and $300 or so pre-owned. This one proves dial artistry isn't the exclusive property of Grand Seiko and Patek. The design brief came out of a collaboration with Shobu Ishigaki, a mixologist working a bar in Tokyo's Ginza district. Not a designer, not anyone from the watch industry, a bartender. The reference was the surface of a cocktail, the way light moves through a properly stirred drink, and the way the color changes depending on where you're standing. What Seiko built from that is as much a technical exercise as an artistic one. 7 layers of lacquer over a sunburst base, each layer applied, cured, and buffed before the next goes on. The result doesn't read as a surface, it reads as depth. In some light, it's a solid, still navy. Move your wrist a few degrees, and a starburst opens out from the center, and the color turns almost iridescent. Photos don't capture it. It only happens live, on your arm, every time you move. Grand Seiko does dials with comparable ambition, enamel and urushi, and hand-applied textures, and those start at $5,000. The caveats here are real. Base models use Hardlex. Water resistance stops at 50 meters, and accuracy is 15 to 25 seconds a day. Want sapphire and a longer reserve? Go look at the SPB references. But for a watch that's simply straightforwardly beautiful, this dial embarrasses things, costing 4 times as much. Watch number 8, the Baltic HMS. $420 to $500. French microbrand, founded in 2017 by Etienne Malek, named for his father, a collector who grew up on the Polish coast of the Baltic Sea. That history shows in how the company builds watches. The sector dial is a 1930s idea, concentric rings dividing the face into zones, developed when designers were figuring out how to carry pocket watch legibility onto a much smaller surface. Pre-war watches with sector dials do serious numbers at auction now. Baltic's position was that the design deserved to exist in the present, rather than only in vitrines. Assembly happens in Besançon, the historical center of French watchmaking. The crystal is domed Hesselite, which adds that vintage warmth. The Miyota movement inside is Japanese and dependable. Production runs are small on purpose, so references sell out and stay sold out. This isn't going to beat the Komatsu on a spec sheet, and it isn't trying to. What you're buying is design credibility, anchored to a specific moment in history, made by people who obviously care. For under $500, that's a rare thing to be able to own. Watch number 9, the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical, $525. Yes, that's over the ceiling I set. It's on the list anyway, because leaving it off would be dishonest about where the value is. Hamilton supplied watches to the American military from the Second World War through Vietnam, and it's in the government procurement records. When troops needed synchronized timing in the Pacific, in Europe, in Korea, in Vietnam, they were wearing Hamiltons. The Khaki Field descends directly from those watches rather than merely gesturing at them. Every priority on the dial, legibility first, and nothing decorative, is a military design priority carried into civilian life. The H50 is hand-wound, which means every morning on purpose. For some people, that ritual, the spring taking tension under your fingers, is the entire appeal. If it sounds like a chore, the Khaki Field Automatic is the same watch with a rotor and 80 hours of reserve. Either way, you get sapphire, a 38mm case, Arabic numerals, 100 meters, and Swiss manufacture. The IWC Pilot's watch, Mark 20, runs $5,800 on the same design philosophy. Once you know what the Khaki Field is and where it came from, that comparison isn't close. Watch number 10, the Tissot PRX Powermatic 80, $650 to $695 retail, $400 to $450 pre-owned, also over the line, also staying. The integrated bracelet is the whole point. Audemars Piguet made that idea famous in 1972 when Gerald Genta drew a sports watch where the case and bracelet were conceived as a single continuous object, tapering and flowing into each other with no lug break. A Royal Oak today is $20,000 and up. The PRX takes that language and sells it at $650. The execution isn't Genta level, and I'm not going to pretend it is. The impression it makes on the wrist, though, is closer than the price gap suggests. The Powermatic 80 gives you 80 hours of reserve. The silicon balance spring makes it anti-magnetic, and silicon hairsprings were a $5,000 feature 10 years ago. Sapphire crystal, 10.93 millimeters thick, which is slim for an automatic with an integrated bracelet. The tapisserie texture, the butterfly clasp, the way the bracelet narrows toward the wrist, all of it done with care. The honest criticism, the palette fork in the escapement is plastic. That's a real shortcut. You won't feel it in daily wear, but you should know about it. At $400 pre-owned, though, you're getting Swiss manufacture, an integrated bracelet, an 80-hour reserve, and sapphire. I don't know what else in that range is close. So what do you take away from this? Not the model names and not the prices, but the framework behind them. Sapphire used to require a $500 minimum. This year, you can have it at $200. Silicon balance springs were exclusive to $5,000 watches a decade ago, and now sit inside a $650 Tissot in-house automatics with 70 and 80-hour reserves, applied indices, ISO certified dive ratings. All of it lives under $600 now. These aren't approximations of luxury features. They're the features at prices that didn't exist 10 years ago. The Swiss industry held something close to a monopoly on quality watchmaking for decades and priced accordingly. What broke it was the opening up of movement supply chains, cheaper precision manufacturing, and information. Once you know what you're looking at, you stop paying for the logo and start paying for the finishing, the movement, and the materials. At that point, the $200 watch and the $2,000 watch are in a very different relationship to each other than the boutique would like. If I could only keep one off this list, it's the cocktail time. That dial does something 7 layers of lacquer earn, and no amount of money can shortcut. And it came out of a conversation about drinks in a Tokyo bar. You don't need a fortune to have good taste. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the next video on your screen for another interesting breakdown on your favorite watches.